Hi everyone and welcome to bioequestrian. Today we're going to talk about jumping for the first time. It doesn't matter how we understand first, whether it's the horses first, the riders first, or the first after a break. It will be about what to demand from the horse, what to demand from yourself, and what to pay attention to. And firstly, we've got the approach. A good approach is the foundation of jumping. This should be practiced beforehand on the poles, and it is in our video on pole work that you will find why the approach must be straight. Light with control over the horses and riders' shoulder blades. You can check that out to have the full view of the topic. There's two key things here. The horse must stay between our aids. If you want to understand that better, check out our video on how to turn. And the approach must also be with impulse control, which doesn't mean rushing like a madman. Let's stop here and think about that impulse control for a moment. For the jump, we need the energy that comes from the strength of the hind end. We want our horse to jump this obstacle with us together, not each in their own style. It is obvious that we need to focus on making sure that it is the hind end that we feel best, that we have the most of between our aids, and that we accumulate there the strength necessary to complete the task. Why is this even mentioned here? We don't want to see a picture of a man jerking the horse's head from right to left and pushing the poor crazed animal into something by force. That's just not what it's all about. And here a little note, we've gotta use our imagination a little. Try to remember how children overcome the obstacle of a paddle. Some will joyfully run into it before their mom yells that this is not allowed. Another child will run and in front of the paddle itself will stop, look at it, aim, and give a great leap. Another will try a little to the right, a little to the left, a little off one foot, but will somehow bounce over. Before you go jumping, think about what kind of a child is inside of you and how your body will try to react. If you don't know, just try jumping over something from a light jog. You'll know more about yourself before these habits are discovered by your horse. Next, you will probably discover which child your horse is like. This is where we reach the point when the horse needs some guidance. Would it make sense to drag a, say, 5-year-old child by the hand to jump over a paddle? In some, the braver ones, such rushing into the obstacle will bring good results. In most, it won't bring such great effects because later, without pulling on the hand, they will prefer to simply avoid the paddle. Sounds logical? We'll get back to that when we will get to the actual jumping part, but for now let's focus on guiding the horse to the jump. And here we need to use our imagination yet again. This will help us to guide the horse and maybe it will be a cool trick for you. Imagine a frame as from a mirror. Light, quite flexible but sizable. Now imagine that you are inside this frame. And you rest the end against your bottom or hips with your hands holding the sides of the frame, leading it in front of you. Great, now put the horse there. The more of the horse's rump you can fit in your imagined frame, the more hind end engagement you have. And the front end, you just need to support it and put it in the right direction. And going back to the impulse control, focus on the front of your frame being light and not lowering but rising slightly. Then you have a guarantee that the horse's hind legs drive the whole system and that the shoulders are ready to work properly. And second up, we've got the rhythm. We aren't going to take care of the engagement of the hind end while taking our first ever jumps. There are so many things to grasp and so many difficult moments in those first attempts that it is not worth focusing on something that comes with time and training. Let's focus on what's important in those first jumps and have a real impact on them. Let's think about rhythm. A huge task facing the rider here is to maintain the rhythm before and after the jump, preferably the same rhythm. This is needed not only for the rider to be able to maintain a smooth balance throughout the exercise, but also for the horse to keep the rider's weight on his back steadily without throwing the rider in different directions. However, let's return to the childlike behaviors for a moment. Completely different challenges will be faced by those who jump by the hand with that child rushing forward, and by those who have to think about how to bounce off the ground and with which leg. And other challenges will arise for those running up to the obstacle in a zigzag to find the right place to jump off of. Let's look at what kind of a role the instructor needs to fulfill. We have to get a very quick idea of what kind of a child sits in you, because some will stiffen up, some will try to stop the movement, and some will close their eyes and just ride. On top of that, there's also the horse. That's why it's much easier to start jumping on a horse experienced in the job. Sometimes, however, we don't have that privilege. When it comes to horses, it helps a lot to use cues properly when working on keeping the right rhythm. If you want to know some more about that, then let us know in the comments what exactly do you need. If you've got an unusual situation, send us an email, we'll do our best to help out. For now, let's return for a moment to those children jumping over the puddle, this time in relation to horses. If our horse likes to get very close, then performs a goat-like jump, we put just a simple pole in front of the obstacle itself as kind of a trampoline for the horse. It would be best to approach this with a less intense trot so that the animal can calmly look at the task. If we happen to be dealing with a zigzag devotee, it is better to set a pole right behind the turn and another in front of the obstacle itself, also as a little trampoline. This should help regulate the length of the fillet already at the exit of the turn to the obstacle and eliminate excess suppleness and softness these horses tend towards. And what about the speeding ones? Here it is best to play around with the very appearance of the obstacle or obstacle layout. We'll get back to that in a second. One of the best exercises to regulate the rhythm are bounces or cavalettes in canter. However, those are hard exercises. Too hard for the first jumps for both the horse and the rider. One obstacle with a flat pole in front of it is a big enough paddle. Let's not complicate things. Just because the height itself is lower does not mean that the task is easier. If that were the case, the most difficult competition would be jumping a single obstacle, which is simply not the case. Do you trot it or do you canter it? Both have their advantages. First of all, we want our horse-rider pair not to have to exert a lot of effort to get to the jump itself. We want our pair to get to the obstacles willingly and with impulse and to have pleasure and fun with these exercises. After all, that's what the beginning of any adventure is really all about. Depending on their temperament and ability, we approach the jump from a trot or canter. It is best to use a mix during each training session. What then are the pros and cons of one and the other? Let's start with the trot approach. These seem easier at first, but they actually are easier only for those cautious children. We use them for lazy horses. In this exercise, we want to get a natural striving towards the obstacle and a willingness to jump. It is also possible to put a few trot poles before the jump in more advanced work. However, jumping from trot requires a lot of force and strength, putting more stress on the joints of the horse's hind legs than jumping with more energy, so from canter. Therefore, the use of trot jumps for young horses should be very carefully done so as not to overload them. It is also, of course, a way to significantly improve the strength, speed of the takeoff, and the technique of the jump itself. We just need to use it carefully. For the rider, trot jumps are usually more difficult than the ones from canter. Of course, it is easier because of the lower anxiety associated with the canter itself. The lower speed and the shorter fillet causes the horse to be able to bounce off both the right and the left leg. Note, however, that the steps being shorter is the horse's problem. Here it will help to regulate the horse's step length with the help of trot poles. The rider's body, on the other hand, is subjected to the normal laws of physics. That is, it must be taken from a relatively low speed into a quite high one, and this acceleration will be directed at a new angle. If you want to understand this a little better, then you need to check out the laws of dynamics. A bit like an airplane takeoff, the overloads are considerable and it is more difficult to time everything correctly. Canter jumps are smoother and less demanding for the rider in terms of changing the balance. While it is certainly more difficult to find the right distance, and a young horse will not do it for us. On an experienced cantering horse, it will simply be easier. Things will be even easier with nicely visually prepared obstacles and poles. It will also usually be easier to jump from the canter for those less cautious types, both horses and people. Next up, we've got the last step of the approach. The last step of the approach is perhaps the most important task in the entire exercise, in which the rider must also take part. If there's anything we need to pay a lot of attention to, it is this part. We try to make the horse perform this approach properly. Some horses jump as if from momentum, running and without a clear approach. Of course, this does not mean that they will not jump to the other side. They will jump, but for the sake of the development of the pair and safety, it is essential to work on the technique of the approach. A good approach enables a technically good jump. Already during pole work, it is necessary to take care of the right impulse and work of the shoulder blades, so that later on while jumping the horse has the ability to fold the shoulders well fast enough. In this case, what can we do to make the last step of the approach good? To make it easier for the rider and the horse to perform a nice approach, we set a pole in front of the obstacle. For green riders and horses, we set one pole each time. How do we place that pole? Both horse and rider should know that by bouncing in this place and not another, the jump will be good every time. It is good to know what size of a fillet the horse has. So for canter jumps, we set the pole 20 to 30 centimeters closer to the obstacle than the length of the horse's stride at the canter. And for trot, we get it closer to the base of the jump by a turn, so an additional 15 to 20 centimeters. In such a situation, the horse will have no doubts about whether to bounce or take another step. If the jump, for example, turns out to be far too close, a large part of the correction will already take place on the pole and equalize the forces. This will be easier for both the horse and the rider. Of course, we are talking about small jumps for the first time. Remember that you need to watch out for the poles in competitions because here the rules are precise and set specific requirements. Usually the assumption is that the horse canters according to show jumping parkour requirements, and that is usually at a pace of 350 meters per minute, and the size of the fillet is 3.5 to 4 meters. Different countries will have different rules about these poles, so check that out. But if your horse all his life at home does the poles at 2 meters 20 centimeters to 2 meters 80 centimeters, it is better not to put down poles during shows because changing the distances between poles all of a sudden can get confusing. This is one example of how pole work can spoil preparation for jumping competitions. By the way, take a look at our video on pole work whenever you have a minute to do that. But let's not digress and get back to that very last step of the approach. We want the horse to be confident in the jump, so this moment before the takeoff is very important. Sometimes riders talk about the horse attacking the obstacle and being brave. Various terms are used that don't quite reflect what we would like to see here. We're talking about training a pair, so we want to train certain reactions and habits by repeating correct behavior and avoiding mistakes. Let's return for a moment to our paddle. Let's imagine a very elegant lady in a dance dress and wearing stilettos. The lady wants to jump over the paddle, but can she even do it on her own without any help? She can start shortening the steps during the approach and try to jump if the obstacle is not too big. Now let's add a dance partner for the lady. Let's imagine he pushes her if she stops in front of the paddle. Will it be effective and will it be helpful? This represents a wonky jump caused by a leg gate or even worse, a crop. It might even work, but the next time the lady might get really pissed off and go home. Well, let's say the gentleman pulls the lady's hand while running along with her. A little better, right? Also maybe not the best because the lady can't really judge the distance and the big jump won't work, however, it's still better. That represents a rider riding with all his consciousness with the horse and leading it with his legs and contact. In this case, the jump will look somewhat decent. Not perfect, but okay. And what would be ideal? Well, let's imagine that this partner would gently put his arm around the lady's waist and carry her over the paddle, a bit with his strength. Something like lifting in some ballroom dances. Elegant and helpful, right? Besides that, almost everyone remembers such moments with parents, grandparents, or colleagues when we were crossing a puddle. Remember how stable, concrete, and gentle such contact must be to actually help you jump? It also requires trust. I also note here how precise the term support the horse in a jump with the calf is becoming. Don't kick or squeeze. Support the horse with your legs to make it easier for him to jump, like a parent or like a dance partner. Keep the contact on the reins steady and easy to grab, like the railing at the stairs. Do all this in the approach, and the jump itself will be a pleasant feeling both for you and the horse. And most importantly, you will preserve the impulse mentioned earlier. And it has nothing to do with courage or natural tendencies. For everyone, such fun is just joyful, and the horse will be happy to participate in new tasks. It is also worth noting what effects a sudden push, kick, or tickle would have on such a paddle jump, and the so popular leg comment stops being so obvious. If at this stage you have problems with any refusals or other odd behaviors, take a look at our video on strange horse behaviors. You can find a bit of information over there. At number 5, we've got balance in the jump. Since the approach has already been performed, now it's time for the actual action. That is the jump. Let's divide it into phases and note how many dynamics and forces are involved here. The forces and directions change, the dynamics and acceleration change. The balance of the horse and rider is changing, and the whole arrangement is also moving. The balance of the rider must be dynamic in this case. It is necessary to adjust each part of one's body sufficiently in advance so that this action is not delayed. We will not go into the general theory of mistakes in this video. Any instructor will tell you not to be late and not to overtake and similar things. However, as usual with us on the channel, let's pay attention to some small details that are often overlooked. Certainly, in jumping, it is worth focusing on the weight put on the stirrups and ankle joints. It is important that it is even, so the same amount of weight on one leg and the other. Then it is easier for the horse to flip this backpack over the jump. The second very important thing is flexibility throughout the process. Any stiffness here will significantly affect the forces acting, so the more loose and happy you are, the better. It is equally important that the knees do not push the horse's shoulder blades to either side, which is unfortunately very often the case. This is especially a problem for riders holding on with their knees. We talked about this a little at the end of the video on 2-point, so it's worth taking a look there. Every trainer or instructor has his or her own little ways to practice keeping the horse-rider pair balanced. One of my favorite ways is huge cross rails. Note that such a cross rail is high on the sides, so it naturally encourages jumping in the middle of the obstacle. And does it have to be high? It depends on how close the stands are to each other. See how the height changes if you increase the distance between the stands? Cool optical game, right? A small technical note. At competitions, the height of the cross rail is usually strictly specified. Cross rails are always placed so that the horse can knock down the obstacle. The distance when looking from above at the cross rail must be a minimum of the width of your pole. A great exercise for maintaining speed and balance for both the horse and the rider are the bounces. The distance between them depends on the horse and its training. Usually it is about 3 meters. With such combinations, however, we advised against the use of cross rails. Why? Well, let's look at such a combination for example. There is a huge optical problem here with separating one task from another. If the exercise is to be used to boost the pair's confidence and improve balance, it must also be clear for the horse. Bounces require the horse to do the work itself. Therefore, they are helpful. The rider can work on his own body dynamics during this time. At number 6, we've got contact with the horse's mouth. There is also a whole video about contact with the horse's mouth through the bit. You guys can take a look at that video as well. Meanwhile, let's consider the situation in the jump itself. We may amaze you here, but nothing should change. It should be the same as in the turn and in the approach. After all, we ride from the calf to the reins and not the other way around, right? Of course, it is very difficult to maintain a stable contact in the very first jumps. Not to say that it is impossible. Regardless of whether these are the first jumps of the rider or for the horse, always the acceleration and change of dynamics that accompany a jump are in the very first attempts surprising to the newbie. Note that experienced riders leave a lot of freedom to the horse in the first jumps and leave them largely on their own in the contact, so that they can more easily manage their balance. Also, in the rider's first jumps, the instructor will usually ask the rider to put his hands on the horse's neck. That is, stabilize the rider without contact on the reins so that the rider can familiarize his body with the new movement. Only after the rider has achieved balance in the jump itself can he afford to stabilize the contact. Well, and it is in these first jumps that it is better to give up contact with the horse's mouth for a while until we teach our bodies to balance. Only after we have achieved balance in each phase of the jump can we afford to keep a stable and good contact like over that paddle. Everything comes with practice. It's better to let go of your hand in mid-flight than to pull your partner towards you. Number 7 is the landing. First of all, we must make an effort to make the landing after the obstacle safe and pleasant. Let's take care of the ground. Both the takeoff and landing should be on the same quality footing. It will be very difficult for the horse to land in a different ground structure than the takeoff took place in. This can be observed among other things at the cross-country classes on the water jumps. Any change in the ground in the landing can decrease the horse's confidence in the rider. Therefore, in the beginning, it's better to jump on flat ground without hills and holes, with the same structure, so from sand to sand and from grass to grass, etc. Let's also try to make it not slippery. The landing should be done primarily straight and between the rider's aids. By straight, I mean that the horse is bent as little as possible along the spine from the ears to the tail, and the joints of both the front and hind legs will flex appropriately for forward movement. The rider should land fairly evenly, weighing both stirrups and using the mobility of his ankles or ankle joints. We do not land on the knee, but on the lower part of the leg, so an arrangement from the foot to the knee must support us completely. Why do I say fairly even or as little bent as possible? The natural tendency of the horse after landing is to canter, so the horse will not be perfectly straight, but always slightly bent towards the new lead. The hind legs will also usually land somewhat next to the front legs. The horse usually takes care not to step on itself, but for jumping it is nice to put on some bell boots to avoid injuries to the cornet bands. The rider still in the jumping phase before the horse takes its feet off the ground should decide which lead they will continue on. During the jump, the horse will not make any evolution or change. Therefore, we must decide beforehand how we arrange our body. Admittedly, this is perhaps not a topic for the first time jumping. In the beginning, it is indeed important to maintain balance and get back in the saddle. That's right, back in the saddle. You may remember our video on the 2-point. There we explained a bit how these levers function. The second important thing besides landing on both calves simultaneously is to open your hips softly. By opening the hip joints in landing, you cause the bottom to move to the front pommel. That is, you don't get hit by the rear cantle. Your shoulders, on the other hand, stay a little further back, straightening your back and causing you to be able to act faster. Not only do you not look like a frog on the landing, the instructor does not yell at you that you're leaning forward, but you also quickly get back in control of the way you're going in. On the landing, in addition to an even ground, we make sure that there is rather nothing scary. There we avoid not only objects, random things or posts, but also look at the shadows of the obstacle. If the jump has a weird shadow behind it, it is not a suitable arrangement for the very first jumps. A pole behind the obstacle is also not suitable. First jumps may also not work out, and adding additional difficulty behind the obstacle is not reasonable. We know that as a new jumper at the riding school, you mostly don't have a say, so if the instructor sets the poles for you to canter first and then raises one of the poles in the middle, you can only believe that the horse can jump it and approach it with confidence. If that is the case, stay with us till the end because we have prepared a little pro tip for you. The important thing is to land between the aids and get back to controlling the horse as smoothly as possible. With a young horse who is doing his first jumps ever, a pull right after the landing is simply asking for an accident to happen. At number 8, we've got leading after the jump. After landing, our task is to return to riding just as at any other moment of the training. From our point of view, this return is to be above all gentle. In the initial jumps and even in the first competitions, the rider has a lot of time to get back to working with the horse. The horse often recovers in a jump for 1 to 2 steps, and it is also necessary to allow him to do this. And if possible, help him. So we shouldn't try to catch everything as soon as the horse puts its front legs on the sand. We wait calmly for the hind end to stand. That's when the horse should smoothly get back between the leg gates and accept this assistance. Then we pass all the forces through the spine up to the hands, and finally we wait for contact with the horse's mouth. If it doesn't happen in the first or second step, it's not a huge problem. We should then perform a calm half-halt to improve the balance and continue to regain control starting from the leg and seat aids. It's definitely easier and more enjoyable for the rider and the horse to do all this one by one and not all at once. So first we need to find the balance and seat the rider in the middle of the horse and its center of gravity. Then we regain the control of the hind end through the calves and hips. Then we need to gain suppleness in both spines, and finally we gain the contact. Often jumping becomes much easier if the rider focuses on his or her task, which is to continue to plot a course after the jump. The jump itself is not the rider's task. Recognize that with the exception of adjusting his own body, the rider in flight has nothing to do. The whole thing is on the horse's side. The rider's job is to lead the horse to the jump well, to help and in the jump itself only not to interfere, and after landing to continue to lead the way. So it is worth focusing on this last aspect, that is the further route. After all, that's the rider's job. In today's video, we often mention riding between the aids and not a lot of explaining was done on that subject. You can find it in the Why Doesn't My Horse Turn video. We encourage you to watch it. And last but not least, number 9, view of the obstacle. What is it used for and what does it do? One can sometimes be surprised. We all know what it's like when an instructor or trainer pulls out some sort of spooky obstacle. What to expect? We will tell you here so briefly because this topic you could talk about for hours. The basic 2 obstacles you probably know. We'll try to put them in a half circle. With the vertical, it is simple. Jump off and land on both sides. In the case of the oxer, it is a little more difficult, but not impossible. See that we refer to physics all the time. The same angles of takeoff and landing. Right? Let's add a double bar. An obstacle higher at the back than the front. Take a look at our clumsy drawing and answer the question yourself. Which obstacle do we need to get the horses closest to? This is where the answers begin to emerge. In the vertical, all the difficulty is to make the takeoff far from the obstacle. The easiest way, as physics shows, is to jump an oxer of the same height. The matter gets a little more complicated if we raise the second bar, because thus the angle of the takeoff is sharper, and thus the angle of the landing will be sharper too. So we have to react faster. On the other hand, if we bring the horse too close to the vertical, we will get a fault. Also, if we ride only easy double bars in training, then both horse and rider learn to get close to the obstacle. In the long run, too close, this can cause frustration in the show ring. Sometimes it's worth adding a solid base of the jump. Riders often think it is just to spook the horse, but such an obstacle has many advantages. First of all, it strengthens the horse's attention, helps to gain engagement of the hind end and raises the action of the shoulder blades, causing the horse not to take off as close as he would without a solid base. There's another big advantage. The horse naturally measures the takeoff point in relation to the base of the jump, and so do we to the line of our paddle. However, as you could see from our clumsy drawings, what matters for the correctness of the jump is the top bar of the obstacle. This is what the rider should measure to. It is the minor difference that causes us to have such disagreements with horses sometimes. Remember that this difference of opinion often differs by 80 centimeters to 160 centimeters vertically. Horizontally, a little less, but always a little. That is, the most difficult obstacle is just a single pole hanging on the posts. Of course, in the first jumps, it is not about any measuring. These obstacles should be set so that already coming out of the turn, the distances work. We are already approaching the end of this video, but wait for the pro tip. Note how an approach on a small obstacle requires getting rhythm, balance, relaxation and flexibility, contact impulsion, uprightness and ramp strength, so collection. See how nicely this sequence presented to us here interacts with the pyramid of horse training? Usually the pyramid is shown as such an evenly divided triangle, and to me it's more like a painting painted in watercolor, and in some cases even with streaks. Also note how nicely this pyramid shows us not only what the basics are, but also how much time and effort on each ride should be devoted to each of these elements. It's worth thinking about training your horse this way sometimes too. And moving on to our today's pro tip, this is squatting. Do you remember your first posting lesson? Recall how your body looked for balance and rhythm back then. In your first jumps, it's similar. In posting, first everyone tries to overtake the movement with their head, only then with their hips, and that's why they can't catch the rhythm. The body simply doesn't manage to do all of that one by one. You have to do it all at once. Since you're watching this video, you're probably past that period. It's similar in jumping. In the beginning, we try so hard to time our arms and our body tries to send our head into the jump first, so much that our hips and shoulders don't have enough time to catch up. Either we stay behind in the jump or overtake the movement with our head. If you try to perform one after the other, you will not make it in time. Don't try it this way then. That means don't throw yourself, don't get ahead, just squat. In each jump, instead of jumping out, just squat. Your joints will all bend simultaneously, at the right angles and in the right way. You've repeated this so many times in your life that your body will know on its own what to do, and even your hands will be where they should be. Give it a try and let us know in the comments how it worked out for you. And how did you like this translation? Remember that you can always email us or message us on social media. And if you want to have a little fun, then guess what type of kindergartner or model horse was. We look forward to your answers in the comments. If you want some older videos, then you can take a look at our TikTok account. There you will probably see his clumsy first jumps. Remember to subscribe and give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. Thank you so much for watching and see you guys next time.